If you stare at this image long enough, you begin to hear the electrical hum from the strip lights, maybe even see the occasional flicker as you blink. The silence of the image suddenly becomes populated with unrecognisable chit-chat and coughing from the next room, someone of whom I think has been smoking for most of their life. A telephone rings but goes unanswered, but that contently fills a gap. If you keep staring at this image long enough, even after you've counted every square or divided one row of them by another, and then again, you probably realise you've been staring at this image for long enough. Yet I'm told I could be here for hours and I shouldn't move. So I begin to count the squares from the corner of my view to the other. Try counting the squares. Boring, isn't it? Lying on the hospital bed as I stare at the ceiling, I wonder when I'll be told what was happening to me. I recall the concern of the paramedic in the ambulance and the sound of the monitor then. But I'm only 31. I try to quantify my age using the ceiling tiles. The monitor is the same rapid pace now as it was then. I imagine the light strips pinging back and forth a pixel-shaped ball. The beat reminds me of a song from when I was young. Sharp scratch, ouch. I substitute chemical pain relief with thoughts of home. And suddenly, my 3 sons appear to me in the shape of 3 lights. I think I've been staring at this image for too long now. And in between the gaps, I'm just left to pass the time. The image that you see right now is representative of a patient's field of view in a hospital-like setting. This was my perspective when I became a patient a few years ago. I'd worked in the healthcare environment for some years, but suddenly on this day, my perspective completely changed. Some of you will no doubt be aware of how unique the hospital environment is. It's a place where we bring our heightened vulnerabilities and emotions, hope, fear, a whole roller coaster of emotions, in fact. Yet in between those gaps where we are waiting for attention or medical help, we're often left to look at magnolia walls, blank ceiling spaces, and this can feel like an eternity. How often before, when walking in these spaces, had I really taken time to notice these things? And I mean really notice and listen to the sounds of the machinery, the conversations. As a patient now, there was an uncomfortable silence to it all. A silence that could pierce through the noise, the soundscape. And I believe it's in this solitary moment where the power of humanity plays its most vital role. A reassuring smile from a nurse, the gentle touch on a shoulder, a slowing, caring tone. I feel myself nod. This time together allows focus. That solitary moment forced me to reflect, to recognise the importance of the small and sometimes subtle things, those humanistic things that are often taken for granted. So my first question, do we all inherently have or understand empathy? I'd seen how effectively we're able to teach our medical students and staff on technical skills. But what about the soft skills? Empathy, compassion, relating, kindness. These are anything but soft, yet something that was quite easily sidelined in our medical curriculums. So then secondly, and most importantly, if the human touch had such a profound effect, then surely we should be teaching this to everyone, regardless of professional background or experience level, because it's such a vital element of the patient journey. Again, this was repeated last year when my wife and I suffered a tragic loss. And it was a profound moment when the doctor came into the room and very simply sat on the corner of the bed and gave us freely his time. Was that experience? Or was it because this particular person had suffered the same thing themselves? You may have seen the movie The Shawshank Redemption, and as Andy Dufresne, the main character, walks back to his prison cell wearing a polished pair of the prison warden's shoes. The voiceover speaks, "Seriously, how often do you notice a man's shoes? But what if you could wear those shoes? Then you'd notice. Then you'd feel them too." This is a forgotten view. Since I've experienced being a hospital patient, I've been inspired to look at capturing and learning from different perspectives and sharing that with others to help address this ongoing gap for both understanding and incorporating humanities within healthcare education. What if we as healthcare professionals could step into the shoes of the patient and understand what it seems and looks like from their perspective? Before working in healthcare, I spent over a decade behind the camera and studying film. As we know, film has this ability to convey emotions and characters, these fantastic storylines. We choose to go to the cinema or watch Netflix at home, and if the film touches our heart, we can choose to believe in those stories and those characters and to relate to that. After all, film has over 100 years of theory behind it, and that's a continually developing thing. And through that, we learn to understand and read the image. Dorothea Lange, a famous documentary photographer, said of the documented image, "While there is perhaps a province in which the photograph can tell us nothing more than what we see with our own eyes, there is another in which it proves to us how little our eyes permit us to see." Do we limit ourselves by only permitting our eyes to see, as influenced by our backgrounds, careers, interests, our own perspective? Do we take time to consider another person's perspective? Back to healthcare, and the camera and use of imagery is used as a medical diagnosis tool that captures encoded images that require skilled interpretation for understanding. X-ray, MRI scan, ultrasound, etc. These images tell of medical diagnosis. What if images took us beyond diagnosis? What if imagery, as understood from film, could teach us about emotions, interaction, empathy, humanities in healthcare? The image here is taken from one of my patient perspective films. We see concern, we see isolation, we see scary eyebrows, and these mask characters that loom over the lens. A light bulb has blown out, something that we didn't really notice until watching the film back. It's just a bulb from a light we didn't need anyway, easy enough to change. But for the patient, if they've forgotten to change a light bulb, what else might have they forgotten? These people, the sounds, the lighting, this environment, all contributes to the patient journey. And so I started to film scenarios from the patient perspective. And this idea worked really well. Except, of course, the patient doesn't just look in front of them. They notice everything that's happening right around them. To the sides, the equipment at the corners of the room, the conversations. We needed to capture all of the unseen things. I wanted to place our students in another person's shoes so they could see everything. So I started making films in 360 degrees. No place to hide as a filmmaker, no corner of a room left undiscovered, no excuses. In 2015, when I started my project PatientVR, virtual reality was just starting this new resurgence of interest. And that was primarily aimed at games and entertainment and fun. But I thought, what would it be like to put one of my Patient 360 films in a VR headset so that somebody could put it on and look around and see what it was like to be in the patient's shoes? Those that tried it said that they felt they were part of that journey in an embodied way. Some were shocked, some were tearful. Others said it would help change the way that they would consider their practice. And it gave us a chance to reflect on a different perspective without having to go through that ordeal of being a patient in the hospital for real. Because that can be quite a painful thing, can't it? The important thing here with the filmic interface is reflection. To teach without pointing fingers. To allow the viewer, the participant, to notice what's important to them, to see right around the whole environment and to create discussion. And that discussion in turn, hopefully, where appropriate, changes our behaviour and the way that we interact with the patient. A simple change of perspective that became a learning tool, catalysed with a new technology, led us at our hospital to connect with what it means to be human. With the PatientVR project, I have captured a library of learning scenarios from the patient perspective, often filmed in 360 degrees to allow the participant to consider the whole of the environment, including the incidental details like the ceiling space we've seen before, or the hushed conversations happening in the corner of the room, or that moment of reassuring eye contact that connects us suddenly to the human behind the uniform. A group may watch that same experience, but I found that they will each notice different things as they look around the whole space. We reflect and learn together. Embodied empathy in VR can and will change attitudes and behaviours, and not just in healthcare, but in areas where there is need for equality and diversity, and generally where we need to understand each other better. What do we miss if we ever only look for the perfectly presented image, or never look up to match the alternative gaze? The consideration of perspectives gives us a lot to reflect upon. Virtual reality as a technology is rapidly evolving. It's becoming more accessible in terms of usability and price. Whole classrooms across the world are now adopting VR for learning. The technology is now at a point where we can start to see the world through the eyes of another. Therefore, the content has to be focused on making a positive difference. And that's why I think it's important that I share and teach with my colleagues and staff and friends how to be their own content creators. Today, I'm the filmmaker in the hospital. But what if all staff that had an interest could become their own immersive content creators, telling their own stories, capturing those important narratives for sharing? Now, what might that look like? If content is king, then we need to make sure that those that have important stories to tell, perspectives to show, and skills to teach have the tools to build the content that will take us into the next evolution of medical humanities learning. I believe that everyone should have the chance to create content for these new and emerging technological platforms. And therefore, for the successful adoption of this new technology, we have to create a culture of sharing and collaboration. We do not need to learn to use complex technologies to make impactful content and experiences. Often, it can be found in the simple interfaces or interventions that make the biggest impact. Like, for instance, forming an immersive perspective or bringing the outside in.
Oh, that is magic, isn't it, eh? Oh.
Transporting someone to a beautiful coastal scene or a peaceful forest from their hospital bed. We can make sure that the technology of tomorrow, rather than instilling this fear of replacing us, instead helps us reconnect with our own humanity. Something that medical training and systems are sometimes disconnected from. To wipe away a tear. To just listen. To have time to connect. By being part of that content creation journey that captures those humanistic moments, and by remembering the humanity's need behind new and evolving technology, we can always make sure that there's genuine value there. If PatientVR could be used across the whole of the NHS, it could serve to remind us all that it is often in the small and simple moments of reflecting on another perspective that impactful change can be made. Thank you very much.